Look, there are problems in this country. There's just no question about it. But look, a lot of this are what I would think of as problems that are significant. They're significant. And they're also within sort of the normal range of problems you have in a really big country.
It's a big country with big cities that have big problems. But there are ways forward. Big philanthropies are playing an outsized role. And some cities are working to undo the damage done by earlier efforts at urban renewal. Let's put the future of American cities in context.
TFIC takes you deeper into the stories that are shaping the future of state and local government.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
You're not Buzz Lightyear.
I'm Siri.
And I'm Google.
And I am Alexa.
Alexa seems so smart, I think we'd have a lot to talk about.
Pew, pew.
From governing and government technology, this is The Future in Context. I'm Paul Taylor. This is a special governing cover story episode for the winter issue of the magazine that drops in January. We heard New York Times' David French off the top. He helped set up a conversation with governing editor Alan Greenblatt and senior writer Jared Brey. Alan Greenblatt and Jared Brey are back on the podcast. Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The winter issue of Governing features the future of cities in its package. Both of you have features related to that. I wanted to frame it up a little bit with a David French quote, which isn't usually where we begin these episodes. He was asked what he thought that blue cities in particular could do as the new Trump administration comes together. He had a one-word answer that may help frame this up a little bit. He said, the Dems should run their cities better. Is that fair comment?
Yeah, I think it's not even an unusual comment right now. We ran a column by Alan Ehrenholt recently about the governance problems in a lot of big cities. So, you could, if you're a Democrat, I guess you could make the argument that, well, first of all, we should say that almost every major city is run by a Democrat. I don't know the number at the moment, but it's usually about 20 out of 25 of the biggest cities and 75 out of the largest 100, something like that. So the cities are highly Democratic. And at the moment, a lot of them are, I don't know if I would say highly dysfunctional, but having real problems. With COVID-19 having created, among other things, the rise of remote work. There are a lot of downtowns that are still very empty, which has not helped with crime or homelessness problems, and it certainly doesn't even help with revenue. And Jared has written a lot for us about transit systems struggling as a result. So it is a rough time to be a mayor, and a lot of the mayors are Democrats. And it's possible that if the mayors were Republicans, we'd see the same thing. It was this extraordinary event and so forth. But on the other hand, when you're in charge, you get the bill. And in particular, a lot of them have gotten heat for being seen as feckless on crime. The mayor of Oakland was just recalled last month, and the district attorney in Alameda County, which includes Oakland, and across the bay, the mayor of San Francisco lost her reelection bid, all primarily due to a sense that the cities were not under control. And so, the sort of downtown revival boom that we've had for about 30 years now was made possible due to the precipitous drop in crime rates starting in the mid-90s. So, yeah, if people don't feel secure, they're not going to put up with one-way streets and all the other terrible inconveniences of urban living. So anyway, where Democrats are in charge is primarily the big cities. And, obviously they're governors of many states, but big cities get a lot of media attention, as much as there is nowadays. And so, yeah, they need to be doing a better job at their jobs, maybe given very difficult circumstances, in order to do better politically. So long answer to your question, but yeah, I guess I will end by saying I think it's a fair pundit assessment by Mr. French.
Very good. Jared, in your piece, and it wasn't a mayor of a huge city, but it was a mayor. Is he feeling the squeeze on this as he seeks to revitalize New Haven?
I mean, I think New Haven, like a lot of the cities that Alan's talking about, not that it's among the sort of biggest of the big, but it's I think it's been a Democratic-led city for a long time, and probably will remain so for a good long time to come. There's a big liberal sort of population center there. The issues that I was writing about are sort of these sort of like built environment of the city itself. How does the city fabric sort of play into the health of the people that live there and make the cities functional and things like that? You get to focus on those things more when you're focusing less on, the things that Alan was saying are sort of driving the headlines around democratic dysfunction in big cities, like crime and things like that. While it's true that there's been a lot of dysfunction in big cities, there's also been a wave of crime that went across the whole nation that has sort of since ebbed a little bit, to sort of coincide with the worst parts of COVID and things like that.
So let's name the mayor of New Haven and tell us what you learned from him net.
Sure. I spoke with Mayor Justin Elicker of New Haven, who's been the mayor since, I believe, 2020. And I was asking him specifically about a handful of projects that they're doing to cover over and otherwise use some of the spaces that were created during urban renewal and the highway building project in the mid-20th century. New Haven had, I think, more spending per capita on urban renewal and highway building than any other city in the country. And so there's like a lot of places around New Haven that are just highway adjacent or somehow sort of formed by or defined by their relationship to a highway. And they've been doing these projects under a series of mayors, but most recently under Mayor Elicker, where they're trying to make some of those spaces more urban, make them more walkable, make them more friendly to people, less dangerous to pedestrians, and overall sort of knit the city back together along these sort of wounds that sort of opened up during the mid-century.
The project was stopped, but it was stopped after many more houses were demolished along this corridor. And so if you look on Google Maps to the west, you'll see basically parking lots and open green space now, which all used to be neighborhoods that were intended for a highway that have been nothing since other than parking lots and green space. And there have been some community members that have been working for decades to build something there that is respectful to the neighborhood, kind of level of development, not some huge tower, because in that area it's very much on either side of the highway, 2-3 family homes, and that reflected their views and vision. And so we now have a construction project that's almost completed that has a lot of units of affordable housing. It's a beautiful project, and it was led by community members that have been living there for years and years and years. And it's a pretty remarkable accomplishment that, frankly, people that have almost no experience doing any development were able to, over years, pull together the expertise and the financing to make this project happen. Us being able to support those types of projects that are really community-led is important to acknowledge the impact of the past, and us to do as much as we can to ensure the inclusivity of the developments that happen in the downtown crossing area is also really important. And then on top of that, we're looking at pedestrianizing some of our streets in the downtown area. Yeah. And one of those, the vision is to connect that with the downtown crossing area as well. And so there's still a focus on the potential. There's the final kind of phases, as we call parcel B, of building yet another building there. Mm-hmm. But a lot of what's driving it is how do we continue to make this a place where people really want to be. Yeah. And the infrastructure changes, the public infrastructure changes are something that is expensive and we have to address, but that's not driving a lot of our thinking.
Mayor Elicker's, one of the things he said to me, which I found so interesting, was that it sort of creates doing work like this creates opportunities for people to be better people. I think this is a very sort of Northeast liberal way of looking at how the built environment sort of defines our experience to a certain degree. But it's interesting too to think about how people's experience of day-to-day life is to a certain degree defined and changed by the spaces they're able to use. And so if you create more spaces that allow people to sort of interact on a human scale, then maybe they have a chance at a better quality of life and things like that. So that's what he was talking about. But a lot of these projects that he's working on have been going on for decades, and it'll take decades more to sort of finish.
Is that model replicable by other mayors in other cities?
Yeah, in some ways, it's not even. It's not even a model. I mean, New Haven was sort of a model of the earlier generation of projects, which were sort of seen as very destructive. These highway building projects. New Haven is one of like dozens of cities currently that are working on these sort of small scale urban mobility projects that are meant to sort of make life better for people, and federal grants that help people do it, and there's state money that are helping people do it. There's like urbanist publications that are dedicated to sort of how do you enact the best strategies along these lines. There's a whole network of cities that are working on the same types of work. They just have a lot less powerful tools than their sort of generational forebears did back in the 50s and 60s, who were working with untold federal sums to remake cities and according to the current ideas of the day.
What surprised you in both the interview with the mayor and your other reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised. What surprised me? I mean, New Haven's fascinating because it really is in some ways part of the New York metro area. And so you get, I live in Philadelphia. I took the train up from Philly through New York to New Haven. So you see sort of the way that New York's, globalness defines that whole region. And at the same time, the highways there in New Haven are part of like putting it into a circuit with the cities further to the northeast, Boston and things like that. So New Haven's very much like on this sort of belt between a bunch of other places, and I think that in decades past, its sort of value was seen as being part of that broader network of cities and the sort of broader sort of economy of the Northeast. And what's interesting about the projects I was writing about are the way in which they're trying to define New Haven as a place that's, it's its own type of place, that it's for New Haven people. It's not just for the broader Northeast economy and sort of Yale's sort of like outsized economic power and research power and things like that. That they're trying to a certain degree reclaim the space of New Haven for people that live there.
That New Haven vibe is not unlike what we've traditionally heard from foundations and philanthropies. And most cities have at least one, and there's national foundations that try to do good work as well. For about 3 or 4 years, governing was involved with Living Cities that set out to make life better for urban residents, make their life better. And they have had some levels of success, but it was charity funding charity. Alan, in your piece, it talks about a shift in the role of foundations in cities. What does that shift look like, and have they taken on more of an outsized role?
Yeah, so we've been mainly talking about mayors, but obviously mayors are not the only actors in the city. And, the mayor of New Haven is not even particularly the star of Jared's story. And my story was set primarily in Pittsburgh, which happens to be very rich in foundations. I don't know if it's true now, but there have been moments where Pittsburgh had the second most foundation money per capita after Seattle due to the enormous Gates Foundation there. But there's Heinz money, and there's a Hillman Foundation, there's a Mellon Foundation, Pittsburgh Foundation, and there are dozens and dozens of foundations in Pittsburgh, some of which have multi-billion-dollar endowments. So there are cities of roughly that size, usually not the biggest cities, but some others, Tulsa, Indianapolis, Columbus, Ohio, where foundations are not only big enough to matter, but also are shifting from the traditional model. And it's not particularly a new thing at this point, but foundations have always given money to charities, schools, the symphony, things like that. And they still do that, but some of them are acting more like venture capitalists in trying to invest in basically economic development. So in Pittsburgh, the most notable example is, the Pittsburgh economy has been totally reshaped over the last 30 to 50 years. There was the collapse of the steel industry, which created what amounted to a local depression with unemployment well into the 20s. And the steel mills have almost all shut in that whole region, and in its place has since emerged a hyperdrive version of Eds and Meds, where Pitt and Carnegie Mellon have fueled some real strong clusters in life sciences, in AI, in robotics, and other advanced manufacturing. So it's really the universities who decided to become investors in the city, with the chancellors of those two universities leading the way in a very conscious way. But although they also got help from the state, they got plenty of money from the foundations. So right now there's an abandoned steel mill about 3 miles outside of the downtown that is being remade into an advanced manufacturing campus with some housing also. And that land sat there for a good while, 20 years. 4 foundations bought the land, and then 3 of them ended up holding onto it for a long time. They wanted to create a green campus that was totally self-sustaining in terms of energy and so forth. But now the universities and private sector partners are moving in with advanced manufacturing facilities, and some of it's open and some of it will be open next year. But we're talking thousands of jobs, high-end jobs. And none of that would have happened without the foundations. And, you could debate, should foundations be buying real estate? Well, they want to make their communities healthier. So one way of doing that is to have housing assistance programs and have education assistance programs. So another way is creating jobs. So anyway, they're certainly playing that role, a role you would expect the city itself to be doing.
Let's go out on this. We write for people who make government work. From your respective features, what are 2 or 3 things that people should be paying attention to in the new year and beyond?
Well, we are putting out an Issues to Watch package, which we do every year at the start of the year, and trying to highlight some of the major issues that people will be thinking about, at the policymaking level anyway. Some of them are perennials. Budgets, always an issue. Crime, pretty perennial. Taxes, things like that. And then every year brings new things. I mean, we're in this era where state lawmakers in particular are trying to get their arms around AI and how to regulate it and whether to regulate it, how best to regulate it, and also how best to get government agencies to start using it a little more. And, another tech issue that we're writing about is social media. And basically, there are a bunch of states now that have put some kind of parental controls or minimum age requirements or whatever, trying to, or encouraging schools. A lot of districts are doing this themselves, keeping phones out of the hands of kids, at least during the school day. I think any of these laws that have made it through the courts have been swatted down, but there's still a lot of interest in figuring out how to do it without violating the First Amendment, minimizing the use of social media and phones, which are now shouldering some of the blame for kids having high levels of anxiety and depression these days. So those were just a few, but there'll be many others as well that we're going to be covering in that package and through the year.
All right. All of that is good. Plus, there's a killer article about, or a column about media, but we don't have to mention that here.
Who wrote that? Who wrote that column?
I have no idea. You'll have to look. Let's go back to the cover package and thinking about the role of philanthropies in cities as it changes, and Jared looking at the reconnecting urban spaces. From those 2 features right at the front of the magazine, what are a couple of takeaways for the attentive reader?
If I could start, just because I was going to follow on something Alan said earlier, which is that when I was doing this reporting about New Haven, I was reading various sort of books and research articles and things like that. And there was somebody who was talking about sort of the way that in New Haven specifically, but I think the point is applicable to a lot of different cities, the mayor and the city government in general are sort of weak actors in an overall urban regime that is sort of defined not just by the political class, but by the whole sort of economic sort of leadership of the city, which would include, in the case of Pittsburgh, a lot of other places, the foundations and the universities and things like that. And so I think that, you can argue about how much power any individual mayor has. I think the more that a mayor is able to understand the sort of like limitations of their own power and use it in soft ways and sort of, get people on board with their vision, the more they're able to sort of actually influence the way the changes and the trajectory of the city, more so than sort of being a sort of powerful person from the top who says, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to be my way or the highway. There's recognizing the sort of limitations of the power of that office specifically can actually lead to sort of using it in ways that are more powerful, I think.
Let me put a more positive spin on that point. So we know mayors are not the only actors in a city. We know they have to get approval for things from city council. They may even fight with some of their agency heads that they've appointed themselves. But on the other hand, they're the mayor. So we start off this conversation where we're talking about what's happening in cities. We said, how are mayors handling this? This is the natural assumption to think that the mayor is the person in charge. And, governing wonks will, of course, know that some cities, the mayor has essentially no power or no more power than any other member of the city council. Having said that, the title is a powerful title. And mayors, just like governors and presidents, can get people to return their calls and, in fact, can get people to show up at meetings. So you're right, Jared, that they have to be aware that they're one actor among many, but they can get, let's say the university has an idea for a new center that would maybe spark some industry, and the mayor might be great friends with the CEO of the major foundation, and the mayor can call a meeting and get them together. They may or may not need the mayor. I'm sure the universities would have a relationship with foundations, but you get my point. Whatever the issue is, mayors alone can bring together the biggest private sector employers, the biggest public sector employers, the universities, the philanthropic community, and all the players that are needed to make a city succeed. And one thing I've learned over the years writing many, many stories about cities is usually when there's collaborative leadership on the ground, that is the best formula for success. So it doesn't have to be driven by the mayor, but it's most likely going to be the mayor who drives it, in part because of the title and in part because it's only the mayor who is thinking about every aspect of the city.
Much good reading in the winter issue of Governing Magazine, and it will all be available at governing.com. Jared, Ellen, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
My colleagues and friends, Alan Greenblatt and Jared Brey, the editor and a senior writer, respectively, at Governing Magazine. My friend Noel Nell is our executive editor. My friend Ashley Silver has been my co-host. And other friends from Governing and Government Technology, plus a guy named Clay, have been contributors, collaborators, and guests on many of the 136 episodes of this podcast, The Future in Context. I mention all of that because this will do it for me on the podcast. I am wrapping up 23 years with the parent company of Governing and Government Technology. In the new year, I start a new adventure in public affairs television. Leaving is hard, but I'm very excited by the new opportunities ahead. Here's the point in all of this. Thank you for listening. We produced this for you, and you did us the great favor of spending a little time with us every week. We appreciate that more than you know. The podcast will dip into a hiatus for the time being, and then reemerge in 2025 with a different host, a different producer, but the same dedication to telling stories that matter to the people who make government work. It has been a pleasure. Thank you, and